today is Reverend Sally Perris, who with her husband Lyle leads the Wednesday morning communion group that meets here at church. Sally, thank you for joining me.
It's a pleasure.
So Sally, you and Lyle meet with a group of 6 or 8 people every Wednesday morning here at church.
Mm-hmm, that's right.
And administer the Eucharist as well.
Yes,
together.
That's right. Yeah.
Would you like to tell us a little bit about your group?
Well, in fact, it was the sort of remainder of a group that had been meeting in the same way down at St. Peter's before it was sold. But they are people for whom it's important, and the original members are not. I think there might only be 2 left now, and one of them can't come or doesn't come to church on Sundays, and so that's her church experience. And we did talk about the Eucharist and having the combination of digging into Scripture and in a less liturgical way,
Yes.
and having a very not casual, relaxed kind of communion service is something that they all value. So.
And your group is open for others to come along to, should they also wish for that?
Absolutely. Obviously it's not much use to people who are working, but anyone else who's interested in joining us or trying us out on Wednesday mornings is welcome. We meet in the warm lounge of the church office, and at 10:15.
So Sally, as you mentioned just a moment ago, your group has been working through the Unfavourites series this last few weeks, and we decided to have this talk because you've dropped into my office a few times after a group meeting to say how well the discussion has gone. What has stood out for the group in this set of studies?
Well, I think one of the things is that those families back then were no different from families now.
So we're going right back to the start of Genesis here, aren't we?
Yeah, thousands of years back. What is it? 3,000 or so years back,
I guess.
something like that. Yeah. These vivid stories with all these details about human interactions, and it's just the same sort of thing that goes on in families now. In fact, more than half the group members really related with the stories because of what appeared to be difficult relationships between siblings.
I guess for all of us, unless we are only children, our earliest experiences of life are of siblings and the rivalries that can involve, and sometimes the competition for parents' attentions or affections. Yeah. What are some of the wonderings the group has been left with? Has it given rise to questions for you all?
Well, certainly for me and for some of the others, the place of success being seen as evidence of God's favour is something that has never sat comfortably with me, and just realising that was how people saw it back then, and a lot of people still do today, but it's not actually true.
Right.
It's a flawed image of God.
Yeah, right. We were just talking before we started recording about the reconciliation between Jacob and Esau.
Yes.
And the way that Jesus' parable of the prodigal son has real echoes with that story. There's this reconciliation between a wronged party and a wrongdoing party, I suppose. And we typically read the prodigal son as the story of God receiving back the faithless human child. But if you map that back onto the Esau story, it's like Esau is kind of inhabiting the God role, the long-suffering, waiting character who receives back the one who sinned against him, I suppose. Are there any particular insights or tentative conclusions that group members have reached?
Well, one thing we all observed was, amongst most of our wanderings, there were really questions about what it was like back then,
Yeah.
and understanding really that you have to be careful when interpreting scripture today to try and get into the mindset of the people that were in that story. And it's not always easy, and we never can completely.
They're quite foreign stories, aren't they?
Well, in a way they weren't.
What? Okay.
They were just very human stories, but the context in which they were was quite foreign, and we're never going to know all the ins and outs of it.
No.
For example, one quick question at one time was about the bestowing of the blessing.
Yeah, I was just thinking about that.
Yeah.
Like, why could it not be re-bestowed or shared or?
Yeah.
I guess the closest thing I've thought about that in terms of the modern day is like Prince Harry releasing his book called Spare the other year.
Yes.
And the way in which it's understood that the crown will be passed to one son and not both. And I wonder if there was something like that operative.
Well, the oldest son, yes,
yeah.
but in this case it wasn't the oldest. Not that there was a great deal of difference in their ages.
Do you have any thoughts about what image of God emerges through the stories?
It was a challenge, certainly, to my current image of God, and I have had to think that through and think, well, yes, what I have what they didn't have, people back there didn't have, and I have, is the benefit of Jesus and the teaching of Jesus.
And were you thinking a moment ago too about the ease with which we assume that success equates with God's blessing, whereas some of these stories give us pause about such an easy assumption?
Well, I'm not sure that the Old Testament ones do, but certainly there's plenty of evidence in the New Testament, particularly in some of Paul's epistles, that things were not plain sailing or successful in the worldly sense.
Well, Sally, thank you very much for taking time to talk this morning. You too can join the Wednesday morning communion group, 10:15 on Wednesdays in the church office. And Sally, thank you so much for joining me this morning.
Yeah, well, thank you for putting the studies together.